Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to Kingdom Principles with Reverend Dr. Mpoke. Today, let's talk about not going back to what God has delivered you from, the story of the children of Israel. So, the children of Israel were in Egypt as slaves under Pharaoh, and they cried out because of the bondage of their slavery, and God sent them a deliverer, Moses. After the 10 plagues in Egypt, which ravaged the Egyptians and set apart the Israelites because they were not ravaged by the plagues. Finally, after the 10th plague, Pharaoh sent them out of his country. God had won a victory for them, and they were now free. So they left Egypt in their drones. There was such a big multitude of people, a great multitude of people. Let's see what Exodus 13 from verse 17 and 18 says. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory. Even though that was the shortest route to the promised land, God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Thus the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. So God knew his people. He knew that if they face trouble or war, they may want to run right back to Egypt since that is what they know. So God led them on a roundabout route. Now, Pharaoh was recovering, licking his wounds back in Egypt, and said, what have we done? We've let these people go. So decided to chase after them. Let's read Exodus 14 from verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord and they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. Does that sound familiar? That's worldly reasoning. It's They say a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. It's better a slave in Egypt than a dead person in the wilderness. But the person of faith moves by faith and not by fear. They were reacting out of fear, not out of faith. God had shown his marvelous acts in their presence through all the plagues that came upon the Egyptians and yet spared them. But they were still afraid. They hadn't trusted God enough to know that he wouldn't take them this far and abandon them halfway. That is not God. But they allowed fear to take over and complained. What seemed reasonable, but that was worldly. It wasn't faith driven. We're better off slaves in Egypt than corpses in the wilderness. They didn't trust God enough. The lesson today is when God takes you out of a situation, don't out of fear go back. In faith, trust that the God who took you out of that bad situation can maintain you onto the path to your promised land. But it takes faith on your part, not worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom will take you back to your bondage, bondage to sin, bondage to whatever was holding you captive, whatever addiction it was. But faith in God lets you keep on forging forward, trusting God, who is all faithful. Let's read Proverbs 26, verse 11. What does it say? It says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Galatians 5, verse 1 also tells us that for freedom Christ has set us free. Hold fast, therefore, do not submit to a yoke of slavery. The Egyptians wanted to submit, the Israelites wanted to submit to slavery under the Egyptians out of fear. God has set us free from different things. Slavery to addiction, slavery to sin. Hold fast. Do not go back to what God has delivered you from. Let us learn a lesson from the Israelites. God delivered them. He told Moses to stretch forth his hand. Moses stretched forth his hand over the Red Sea, and God parted the Red Sea, and the Israelites went through as on dry ground. They went through the Red Sea on dry ground. And when the Egyptians followed, the sea covered the Egyptians. And so God delivered them yet again. Let's learn to trust God and not go back to what He has delivered us from. Move forward in the freedom that Christ gives and say no to the slavery of sin. Be blessed.